You can see this continuation of this cannibalistic storyline, yes? Well, once he finds out, he's enraged. He chases the two sisters who are trying to get away, and all three of them are turned into birds. Procris is turned into the nightingale, sad because she had to kill her own son. Philoma is turned into a swallow. Of course, a swallow has no, because Philoma has no tongue, the swallow only twitters and never sings. And Atreus, in one storyline, is turned into a hawk. By the way, Roman writers will change the order of this and will name Philoma as the nightingale, which Hamilton points out is obviously silly because the nightingale sings and Philoma had no tongue. The niece of these two sisters is someone named Procris. And Procris, and the story of Procris and Cephalus is also an interesting story. Let's tell that one. Procris is married to Cephalus. Cephalus is in love with Aurora. Aurora is in love with Cephalus. And Cephalus says to Aurora, the goddess of dawn, no, I got no interest in you. Now we have the rejected goddess lover, and she is outraged. So she plants a seed of doubt in her man's mind. She says to Cephalus this, you better watch your wife, Procris, because I'm not sure she's totally in love with you. Cephalus is so upset that he is disguised and he spies on his wife through disguise. As a strange man, he comes to Procris and he tries to seduce her. Every day she says, no way, I will have nothing to do with you. But one day she hesitates in her saying to him, no, I will have nothing to do with you. In that hesitation, in that moment, Cephalus will say, I've got you. You are unfaithful to me. And he will send her away. Procris will leave. Days later, Cephalus realizes he's made a mistake. He goes and he finds her. She finally does forgive him. Much later, by the way, this story ends kind of tragically. Much later, she will and he will be hunting in the woods together, and he will accidentally kill her in the hunt. The next story from the family of Athens is the story because the sister of Procris is a woman named Orithyia and Boreas. Boreas, the north wind, falls in love with Orithyia, and he wants Orithyia, and Athens says, no way. And so Boreas will carry off Orithyia, take her away. There's an interesting moment in Hamilton's Mythology when she references Socrates and the conversation he has with Phaedrus, where they're walking along the river, and he asks, isn't this the place where Boreas took away Orithyia? And Socrates will say, yeah, that's what they say, but I'm not sure it's a legitimate story. She's pointing out the ways in which there is a rise, we might say, of skepticism in the beginning of the end, if you will, of this kind of mythic religion. Our final story is the story of Creusa and Ion. Creusa is the sister of Procris and Orithyia, and she's another unfortunate woman. Creusa, this is one of those really tragic stories where Creusa is forced to have sex with a god. Now, we've seen this over and over again, gods sleeping with women, especially mortal women. Here you have Apollo in love with Creusa, and he will rape her in a cave. And Creusa will become pregnant, and she will bear the child and leave him in the cave. But when she returns to find the child later in the cave, the child is gone. She assumes maybe the child has been killed. The child has not been killed. The child has been found and has been raised as a priest of Apollo in Delphi. She ends up, Creusa ends up marrying Salvus, and she have no children. And Salvus wants to have children, so he goes to Delphi, and he begs the oracle at Delphi, would you please tell me why me and Creusa can have no children? And the oracle will say, this boy working there, Ion is his name, is your son. And immediately, Salvus is very excited, right? Creusa will discover that Ion is in fact her son. that in fact, after Apollo raped her and she became pregnant, she had a son. She left him in the cave. He was found, and he is now the priest of Apollo in Delphi, and it's her son. Creusa is obviously distraught. She doesn't know how to think about this because she was impregnated by a god. She left her son. Her son is now obviously working as a priest for Apollo. And she's a little upset about that. But Athena comes in a famous appearance to Creusa and Ion. And in fact is told Ion ultimately will rule in Athens. And so Creusa will let it go. At 2a, let's say it this way. The gods have their own justice and their own understanding of justice. It is not human justice. And we should point that out in our notes, really important. That for the Greeks, the gods do it their way. There is no sense of fair play, if you will, in Greek mythology. At 2b, well, the appearance of the god, Athena, at the end of this story is what we call a theophany, where everything is set right. We see the same thing happening at the conclusion, for example, of Homer's Odyssey. This whole notion in 2b, let's write this one down. It is a common motif, this notion of God sleeping with women and impregnating them, and then the women often, almost always it seems, having sons, sometimes daughters, but usually sons. By the way, this is a common motif, and the obvious question is, well, what about when the sex is not consensual? Which it regularly is not consensual. That is to say, male gods, Zeus and Apollo in our story here, actually raping the young lady, and she becoming impregnated. This consensual or not consensual question is obviously deeply concerning, right, in Greek thought. At 3a, well, think about all the other stories that we're maybe familiar with gods sleeping with young girls. By the way, I should just point this out, not to be irreverent, but St. Augustine, the great church father, was not raised Christian, but rather raised pagan. He knew all of these stories. So when he became Christian, he understood there is profound difficulty in trying to explain the fact that a young virgin named Mary will become pregnant with a child named Jesus Christ who will become the Savior of the world. Sounding very similar to a story like this. St. Augustine had to deal with that, as of course did many others as well. He was able to deal with that, but it clearly is one of those kinds of questions about God sleeping with young girls or impregnating them in some way, right? You can think about maybe other stories that you're familiar with. Or think about this one from the perspective, for example, of Ion. You don't know who your father is, or for the perspective of Oedipus, right? You don't know who your father is. This notion that I wish I knew who my father was, right? But I can't know that. Or I discover it only later in my life and sometimes maybe too late. And maybe the lights all come on. Oh, now I understand what's up. Finally, at 3b, what is your view of all these stories, right? Explaining, maybe these stories explaining special kinds of kids, what we today call prodigies, right? I mean, what are your thoughts about that one? Well, now we've ended our study of the most important Greek and Roman myths. We enjoy asking how all these stories end up playing important roles in so many texts that we study and enjoy. For example, in classic works, the works of Shakespeare, the works of Milton, the works of Dante, we've talked about often. Or in popular movies, TV shows, video games. What about video games, right? Why are video games so huge in today's culture? One argument is that they're built around much of the Greek myths that we've been studying. The journey myths, for example, those quest myths, those fighting stories, right? The other thing we'll ask is, what do all these stories seem to have in common? I would put this in my notes. All of these stories seem to share in common the struggle to understand life and to somehow give it value or meaning. What is the importance of my life, and how can I understand that my life has been well lived? These stories will point in directions to kind of help that. Now, in our final lecture, number 10, we're going to turn to the less important myths, as Edith Hamilton calls it, part 6. And we will share for a few more minutes just some other stories of Greek mythology as we finish. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this lecture as well.